The Toronto Blue Jays have made multiple moves, including making a sneaky signing that could pay dividends not only this season for the Toronto Blue Jays, but heading into next season as well. So I'm going to break that down in this episode and discuss who that player is. We also have some very interesting injury updates as Bichette has returned, but we have a shocking Varsho update. So stay tuned for all that in this episode. But before we get into it, a quick reminder, hit the subscribe button. If you're a part of the percentage and aren't subscribed to the channel, do myself a favor and hit that subscribe button. But without further ado, we have a lot to go over today. Yesterday, a flurry of moves were made. They made a sneaky signing. They made another signing. They DFA'd Brian Serven and now replaced him with Tyler Heineman, which we'll also get into in this video. There's a lot to go over today as in a season that's lost at this point, we're hoping for some, Cinderella stories from the young guys. The playoffs are at this point out of reach, but they do have some transactions going down. So let's start with this, and you can see here a pretty big list of moves before yesterday's game. So Bichette is back. He played yesterday, went 1 for 4 with a hit. Will Wagner was placed in the 60-day IL, which ends his season, so he won't be playing for the Jays anymore. But it seems like it's more of a precautionary thing heading into next season, so that's not a huge deal. Dalton Varsho was placed in the 10-day IL retroactive to September 14th. His season has officially, according to Hazel May, been ruled out. So he is done for the year, which we'll break down as well. Stuart Burrow was recalled, not a huge deal, but they signed Nick Robertson. They claimed him off waivers, and Nick Robertson of the MLB, Nick Robertson, not the Toronto Maple Leafs, of course, Nick Robertson, but he used to be a very good reliever in this league, and at this point now, he has still a lot of upside, and the Toronto Blue Jays, not Maple Leafs, the Toronto Blue Jays desperately need relievers, and Nick Robertson could help with that. But those are all the moves, and quite frankly, a lot of them, there are more as well, which we'll get into in a second with the catchers. But the good thing is that Bichette's back, and we were curious to see if Bichette was going to return to the Toronto Blue Jays this year, or if they were going to let him just fully recover. But it seems like they decided to let him come back, get his feet wet heading into next season. We know that he really wants to, and the Blue Jays, according to Ross Atkins, want to compete next year. So by having him on the team and getting him some much needed reps after months of being out with an injury, it's good at a season that's lost. Now, obviously, he takes away time from guys like Leo Jimenez and some other guys like that. But at this point, if the Toronto Blue Jays want to compete next year and into the future, they need to do so by, of course, re-signing Vladdy, but also either getting productivity out of Bichette or trading Bichette. But to do that, you need his value to go up a little bit anyways. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Bichette and how he continues to perform this season. He had a decent start yesterday. He played well in his few stints with the Buffalo Bisons, but it's good to see Bichette back nonetheless. And obviously, Will Wagner, he had a very, very good inaugural year as a Toronto Blue Jay, and it started and finished very solid. So he's hopefully going to factor himself into the season next year. But I want to focus on Nick Robertson a little bit here, but before we do, they claimed Tyler Heineman off of waivers from the Red Sox, and Brian Serven has been designated for assignment, and we're going to dive into that because that also has some other implications, which we'll get into as well here. But now we're going to look into Nick Robertson. Now, obviously, we know that the Toronto Blue Jays bullpen has been an absolute disaster class the entire year, and they're desperately trying to find someone on the waiver wire who, at this point, as we know, the Blue Jays need to heavily invest in their bullpen. They're looking for someone to desperately help them with that, and they're swinging for the fences here, but this guy is very intriguing. We'll also get into another signing they made, which could pay dividends going forward, like we just signed Tyler Heineman. We'll dive into that more in a minute. But focusing on Nick Robertson here, he's still pretty young. He's only 25 years old, and you look at it, season last year wasn't very exciting. He started with the Dodgers. He put up a 6.1 ERA, and then he got moved to Boston. He put up a 6 ERA. So finishing last season in 18 games, he put up a 6.04 ERA, and then you're looking at this year with the Cardinals. He's done a little bit better, so a middling 4's ERA. But the important thing here is that at this point, the Jays are looking for anybody to help give them some bullpen relief, not only this season, but heading into next year as well. As one of the biggest question marks for the Toronto Blue Jays is how they're going to invest into their bullpen and what they're going to do in order to fix their huge bullpen issue. I mean, we've seen down the stretch now, obviously the games don't matter as much because they're trying to just play with the prospects, but they've lost several games because of their pitching staff, because of their bullpen specifically, and they don't really have any guys aside from Chad Green, who also, because of his workload, has started to fall off a little bit. They've started to have guys that really tailed off completely. You think about heading into the season, you had guys like Tim Meza, you had guys like Jordan Romano, these guys who were supposed to be, Eric Swanson as well, solid guys in your bullpen, and they all fell off. Swanson fell off, Jordan Romano got hurt, and Tim Meza is now a New York Yankee, funny enough. So the bullpen is something that needs to be addressed if you're the Toronto Blue Jays, and luckily for the Jays, not luckily for the Jays, but luckily for Nick Robertson in this case, he's given a chance with a 4.38 ERA. He's going to be coming to the Jays now, and if he can make any sort of positive impact on this team, finishing off the year and he has a strong year with the Toronto Blue Jays finishing off the rest of this year, then he could factor into the Blue Jays bullpen next year because of how hard it is to A, get relievers at the MLB level in free agency, and B, I'm not entirely sure that Ross Atkins is going to be willing to pay a lot of these relievers high-end money. Now, granted, they need to address the bullpen. That's no secret, and they definitely need to do so in timely fashion, because if they don't get a good, say, significant upgrade to their bullpen this season, then they're going to be very, very rough heading into next year when they're trying to compete. They have all these guys, but their bullpen is going to continue to give up games every single day, just like we saw a few years ago when they had one of the worst bullpens in baseball. So let us know what your thoughts are on Nick Robertson. I think that he could factor if he continues to develop with Pete Walker and under the pitching staff that the Toronto Blue Jays have, the pitching coaching staff. They could really develop him into a decent pitcher, though there is also a chance that he flares out like he did in 2023. So let me know in the comment section down below what your thoughts are on all of that, because quite frankly, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the Toronto Blue Jays bullpen going forward, because they have a ton of different guys they could get. They have obviously some trades they can make, but signing guys is the most likely option. Let me know your thoughts are on that. And I want to touch on Dalton Varsho a little bit. So his injury has been kind of a mystery for the majority of this season. But now we have some clarity from Hazel May. So he's out for the year. He saw Dr. Keith Meister here in Texas yesterday. Varsho told me he's going to have surgery as soon as he can in order to be ready for spring training in 2025. There's a rotator cuff issue at the front of my shoulder that's been bugging me. So he's out for the rest of the year. Now, obviously, saying he has a season-ending injury is a bit alarming. That being said, there's not many games left, so it's better that he heals from his injury now, goes through the surgery, goes through the rehab, and gets ready for the season in 2025, which is what he is going to do. And Dalton Varsho has been a bit of an underrated asset for the Toronto Blue Jays this year. He put up, like I showed you guys, a few times here, almost a 5 WAR this season, a 5B WAR that is, because of his defense. He's a league average bat, but his defense is the best in baseball. He should have a gold glove under his belt this year, or platinum glove even, depending on how things work out. And if you think about it, if the Jays hadn't assigned Kevin Kiermaier and they maybe added a power bat in left field instead of putting Varsho and Kevin Kiermaier in center, who knows where the Jays would be instead of not even in the playoff race. But shout out to Dalton Varsho for a very successful year, and hopefully he recovers well heading into next year. And then one final note, as we know, the Tyler Heineman thing. They got Tyler Heineman instead of Brian Serven. They sent Tyler Heineman, or they DFA'd Brian Serven, and re-signed Tyler Heineman for the 5th time. They can't shake him at all. But the impact that this has is we know how good Bowden Francis has been, and most of those good starts have been under Brian Serven. And the question Jays fans have is, why would they, at this point of the year when they're not trying to win, get rid of a guy like Brian Serven who's working and rolling with Bowden Francis in exchange for Tyler Heineman, who they're not trying to win games anyway, so why does it matter? Because neither of them are really going to provide any offense for you. The answer to that question is probably they trust Tyler Heineman more with the pitching staff. They want to groom him going forward into next season. And if they can groom him with the pitching staff and they want him to be the backup catcher next year, it makes a lot more sense to groom him in now than to do it in the offseason. So that's probably the reason, but the biggest question is what's going to happen with him and Bowden Francis. But let us know your thoughts are on all these moves. A lot of things going down, and even though the Jays season has lost, at least there's still some interesting storylines heading into the final few games of the season.